firefighting. This forum is for input from different people from the community and shareholders. And we're going to be taking 5 minutes or more. If you need to talk a little bit more, it's understandable tonight. But we're going to get some of your ideas about building equity. But let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Don't hesitate to join us at home. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Karen Oresti. I'm the chair of the St. Louis County Human Relations Commission and here teaming up tonight with Mr. Murdoch and Ms. Theda Person from the county's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. As Mr. Murdoch said, this is, I think, session number 3 or 4 in a plan to build equity for St. Louis County. And our objective tonight is really to listen to input from those who have been gracious enough to come and share tonight and perhaps to answer, to ask a question or two in the course of the conversation. Let me, if I may, start with Jessica Myers. We've asked people, I think I thought we had some time, 7 to 10 minutes for Jessica.
Sure.
She had called it, we have time given the folks on the screen. And Jessica, if you would introduce yourself and share your reason for being here before you launch into your testimony, that would be very helpful. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Jessica Myers. I am the project director for the St. Louis Area Violence Prevention Commission. We're a regional cross-sector initiative that works to reduce violent crime in our region by promoting and advocating for coordinated, well-resourced policies, support systems, and interventions among area governments, institutions like police agencies, and social service agencies that serve individuals and families most at risk for violent crime. And so I'm here tonight to talk about some community engagement that we did around police legitimacy. And it's no secret that there's often a lack of trust between community members, especially people of color, and the police departments in the region. This is due to systemic issues and how the criminal justice system disproportionately affects Black communities. Community members simultaneously feel over-policed and under-policed. This lack of trust may compromise cooperation with law enforcement investigations and can lead to increased violence through retaliatory crime as victims take it upon themselves to find justice for their situation. In the wake of high-profile killings like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Michael Brown, we have again seen in the forefront discussions of the use of force in Black communities. These commissions, after the killing of Michael Brown, led to the creation of the Ferguson Commission that created a slate of calls to action to create justice for all. In the state of police reform from September 2019, Ford through Ferguson noted that meaningful changes, especially policy changes, had not been made in many cases. And so we closed the uncomfortable fact that progress is small and can seem excruciatingly slow and be set by failed and superficial attempts. But it's here, change is happening, and that means we can learn from it and try to do more going forward. One of our objectives at the Violence Prevention Commission is to activate communities to strengthen police legitimacy. Police legitimacy in this context is the degree to which residents believe the police are honest, try to do their jobs well, and are trying to protect the community against crime. Some of the questions we might ask about police legitimacy include, do police give people a chance to explain and to talk to them? Do police make choices on facts, not bias or prejudice? Do police treat people with respect? And do police care about the well-being, needs, and concerns of the community? We recognize that our police legitimacy work, as well as the rest of our objectives, must be undertaken with a racial equity lens that acknowledges and calls out the systemic racism that is baked into many of the systems we and our members represent and partner with. In 2019, we held public community policing events and interviewed 15 law enforcement stakeholders to talk about what's working in policing and what's not working in policing, and what parts of community policing should be prioritized. We also conducted an online police legitimacy survey with more than 1,200 responses. More than 100 of those responses were from St. Louis County residents. We asked respondents to rate statements about police legitimacy on a scale of 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. The three statements for which St. Louis County Police had the highest agreement were: most police officers in my neighborhood do their job well. I would call the police if I thought I saw someone acting suspicious, and I would provide tips to the police to help find a criminal. These responses show that although residents have concerns about police legitimacy, they're still willing to engage with police when a crime or suspicious activity occurs. Measures of equity, though, had some of the lowest scores and were actually lower for county residents than they were for St. Louis City residents, even though many of the other responses were higher for St. Louis County residents. The lowest rated statements for St. Louis County residents were that police enforce the laws the same way across all people, and police serve all people equally. Also low on the rankings was transparency, which was measured by the statement, police admit when they make mistakes or get things wrong. Overall, our police stakeholder interviews, community policing events, and police legitimacy survey feedback can be grouped into four major themes for improving police community relations and for improving equity. They are human resources, how officers are recruited, retained, and promoted. Transparency, how information is shared and officers are held accountable. Community engagement practices, how law enforcement officers engage with residents in their neighborhood and proactively solve problems. And alternatives to police contact, how can we link residents to services without having to go through police officers? So in light of these findings, we've created a set of recommendations and endorsements for public health and safety investments that would address these themes and support equitable policing and violence prevention. So I'm going to talk about just a few of those. The first is to infuse public input into the police collective bargaining agreement process. In the interest of transparency and equity, we recommend including public input in the process and suggest that it should be run by a third party rather than the police department or the union. We believe this recommendation has the greatest potential to be transformative for public safety in St. Louis. It can infuse equity into the fabric of policing by addressing officer use of force, recruitment, retention, and promotion decisions, minimum training standards, and increased mental health supports for officers. Our second recommendation is to create a civilian public safety response for 911 calls unrelated to crime. Police are called on to respond to a variety of 911 calls that are not specifically crimes. Residents call 911 for mental health emergencies, drug overdoses, alcohol intoxication, homelessness, and nonviolent neighborhood disputes. Police are not necessarily the best equipped group to respond to these calls, potentially leading to violent encounters and burnout among officers who are required to respond to calls for which they are not trained. These calls require mental health service providers, crisis intervention specialists, and social workers to de-escalate situations and connect residents to existing resources. We recommend that St. Louis County develop a civilian public safety response network that allows 911 callers to access mental health workers, community health workers, and social workers to respond to calls that are not about crime, to allow residents to equitably receive the services they need without police contact. Our third recommendation is to commit to creating a referral mechanism for victims of crime to the Violence Prevention Commission's Gun Violence Response Network. Non-fatal shootings where someone is injured but does not die are a potential intervention point to interrupt what is usually an escalating cycle of violence. Our crime data analysis shows that for every homicide that makes the news, there are 20 to 30 aggravated assaults, which means there are 20 to 30 opportunities to interrupt that cycle of violence before it becomes fatal violence. However, not everyone has the economic and social resources to recover from gun violence. VPC convened victim service agencies, mental health providers, United Way 211, and other service providers to create a common intake through 211 to navigate victims through the service network to meet their most unmet needs and to identify gaps in service. We recommend the St. Louis County PD work with us and our service partners to create a referral mechanism to seamlessly connect victims of violence to services to help them recover. And finally, we recommend that St. Louis County develop and publicize a policy on interactions with transgender and gender nonconforming people. In our listening session and survey, transgender and gender nonconforming people had the lowest overall ratings of police legitimacy. Out of the 24 measures of police legitimacy, again rated from 1 strongly disagree to 5 strongly agree, The most common answer for transgender respondents on 22 of the 24 items was one strongly disagree. These results echo national surveys like the US Transgender Survey, which show that 57% of trans people reported they are uncomfortable calling the police. When they did interact with police, 58% of transgender individuals reported mistreatment, 49% report being repeatedly misgendered, and 6% reported physical or sexual assault. Because of these concerns, we recommend that St. Louis County Police and municipal police departments develop and publicize a policy on interaction with transgender people. The policy should, among other items, prohibit the use of gender identity as a basis to stop, question, or search someone, prohibit harassment based on gender identity, edit reports to allow for additional gender identities besides male and female, allow people to provide a name currently used in addition to their legal name, and allow individuals to choose where they feel safest when they're being detained in gender segregated areas. Model policies are available from the National Center for Transgender Equality, San Francisco Police Department, and the District of Columbia Metropolitan Police Department. Importantly, and we can't stress this enough, we further recommend that these policies be drafted in consultation with organizations that are led by and serve transgender individuals and convened by a neutral third party to build trust between the police and the community. We stand ready to assist the county and its departments in implementing these equity building strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, hey, Jess, thank you very much. Let me just follow up with a couple of questions. Can you speak a little bit more, and I understand that Mr. Casilius is with us, about the dynamic of being, of some institution being a third party in the context of a collective bargaining, writing essentially or rewriting a collective bargaining agreement? That's a big challenge. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that, and if you're familiar with any communities that have done that successfully.
There are communities that have done that successfully. I don't have our report in front of us, but it does cite communities that have done it. In the communities that have done it, it's a matter of taking pieces of the collective bargaining agreement and having either notice and comment or public hearings on them, not necessarily in the negotiating room at the time that the negotiations are taking place.
Got it.
Okay, and you can email that report to our office, correct?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
I will email my comments and our statement on policing and violence prevention and our collective bargaining agreement public input report.
Thank you very much for that.
And are you familiar with any of the departments within St. Louis County that are already putting into place some of what you discussed in terms of alternatives like partnerships through 211? I mean, my understanding is there are some of the municipalities that are already doing that.
Yes, so there are certain municipalities that are already working with different groups. We partner closely with the health department. We are the action team lead for the health department's community health improvement plan for their violence prevention action team. So we work closely with the health department. We've also worked with the Board of Police Commissioners and the County Council on some of these recommendations.
Good, thank you. And my last question is relative to the 911 piece. What do you recommend, or what did you learn in your conversations with law enforcement officers or folks in the community about dispatchers, and where dispatchers sit in many of these 911 calls where what I would call racism by proxy happens when somebody in a community is acting badly, basically, based on stereotype and their assumption of who shouldn't be in the neighborhood, and pulls the police officer into a difficult situation?
So we didn't hear anything, surprisingly, from the public or from our law enforcement stakeholders about 911 dispatchers specifically. We have worked with St. Louis City on their implementation of their 911 call diversion that allows folks with a mental health crisis to be able to get an unarmed clinician response rather than an armed police response, as well as their co-responder model that has community health workers and social workers riding along with police officers. And that is really one of the evidence-based strategies to try and reduce trauma and burnout among police officers, as well as reduce the potential for those negative or violent interactions.
Okay. And I just realized one more in light of something you said, sorry.
Sorry.
Cure Violence, initially funded in the city, still working, still funded, still any sense of data that shows how effective it is here relative to some of the positive impact it's had in other communities?
Yes, so actually it is on my desk to do, my proverbial desk, to update the Cure Violence tab on the VPC website. We staffed the Community Steering Committee for the Cure Violence implementation in St. Louis City. And that's really about bringing the voice of service providers and community residents into the implementation of Cure Violence. And we do have some promising data that is showing that there has been a reduction in violence in those areas. So hopefully by the middle of next week, I should have that updated on our website. But yes, we have seen a reduction. I will say our theory of violence prevention is that no single program or agency,
Sure.
Not even our agency that has more than 120 agencies that participate in it, is going to be able to solve the violence issue. So we really stress that Cure Violence is evidence-based, 911 call diversion is evidence-based. You know, we really need the city and the county and the region to take a strategic approach to how it funds violence prevention in an equitable way.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
One last question. What is
Yes.
being done to capture the responses of those who are afraid to answer the surveys? Are you talking to people who are scared to talk, even answer surveys?
So we did the survey virtually. We had in-person events where people could come, and it was a discussion event, and then they could take the survey at the end of it. But we also put the survey online so that folks who were not comfortable could take the survey online, and it was anonymous. We did collect basic demographic information, but we didn't collect email addresses, name, address, anything like that. So we tried to make allowances for people, because we know talking about policing and potentially negative experiences with police can be a very sensitive issue. So we wanted to have multiple ways for people to have input.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Jess. Really appreciate. Look forward to seeing you at the next task force meeting.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
All right. You too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Chief John Hampton, please.
Yes.
Thanks so much for being here, Chief.
And give us your name and your title, and then please start your presentation.
Okay. First off, thank you for inviting me here tonight, Ms. Phaedra Person and myself. We talked about this a little bit. So my name's John Hampton. I'm with the City of Ferguson. I'm the fire chief. And tonight I'm going to talk about hiring practices and what we have done to, I guess, improve our hiring practices and potentially our promotional exams later on in the future. One thing we have done since 2014 in the fire service as a whole we have done much better job of getting more minorities in the fire service. I think that a lot of this is through education and letting everyone know that they can do it and that there's resources out there that can help. Every fire department in your community is willing to help you. They're willing to bring you in, be a mentor to you, and also to help you go through the ranks where you need to be to become a paramedic firefighter and or EMT firefighter. What we did, we took, when I first became chief in 2018, I took a hard look at our department, and we really were not reflecting the community. But what we did was we continued our same hiring practices. We continued same tests. We continued with the same type of panel. So what we were seeing is we weren't getting the minorities that we wanted to come in to even take a test. Maybe we would only get 1 or 2 people to come take a test, and we would have 2 minorities out of maybe 30 people taking a test. And we need to change that right off the bat. So what we started doing is we went to the school districts and we were trying to get more involved in the community. Because if you look at the fire department, we are always really good with the young kids. It's where we start losing it is when we get to the high school. They don't want to see the truck. They've already seen the truck. So we now have to get their attention in a different way. And that's that way is through more of a mentoring style. And that's something that we've learned. Where the kids, they're all Google eyes over the trucks and you got them, you know, so we don't put too much effort into that, you know, so, but it is something that we have found that, you know, through a mentoring process is where we've learned to actually get the betterment out of each person that is trying to become a firefighter and or EMT or paramedic. But going back to our hiring practices, we thought we were doing the best thing. You know, we were advertising in the newspapers where we thought we'd get more minority views from and all that, but it wasn't happening. We kept still getting the 2 people showing up to test, and then the problem was we weren't getting good test scores. So we took a hard look at our department, me and my 2 assistant chiefs, and we brought an outside agency in, and it was on diversity. So what they did is they came in, they talked to all the firefighters, and everybody wants more minority. We need to look more like the community. And we were all wanting this. We thought we were doing the right thing all the time, you know, trying to get more people hired, but we weren't very successful. So in reality, we weren't doing things right. So with the help of the diversity group, we saw that first off, we never did education once the test packet was up. It was always come and take your test. Well, one of our problems is testing. So what we did to combat that is now we have an hour to 2 sessions, 1 or 2 sessions, about an hour apiece, actually going over that written test so that this way it's better understood. Then we also got more involved with the older people in the schools and out of schools. So we're so involved in the communities, we already know a lot of our community members. And so we would go to the church groups, we would talk to the pastors, we would talk to, the kids at the pool that are lifeguards. And we would reach out to them and say, let us help you become a firefighter. Now, becoming a firefighter, EMT, paramedic is a different story than just becoming a police officer. And there's nothing, I'm not trying to take away from police officer at all, please me. But the first portion, the EMT and the paramedic, that is very important because that is 2 years. That's a 2-year investment, you know, that we're going to try to mentor this child or this young adult through to get that. And that's something that, you know, it takes a while. So nothing's going to happen overnight. And that's something that I think our residents also had to learn as well, because you're not going to make that change overnight. So what we did is we started mentoring these kids and getting them through the EMT portion. And I have a really good friend down there that works for St. Louis Community College, Paul Peoples. You may know him. Paul's an incredible young man, and he has helped us out tremendously in many aspects that we didn't know that we were doing things wrong in. So once we started working with Paul and some of the EMTs students that we brought to Paul, we started seeing this little bit of growth and this little bit of knowledge and them reaching out to their brothers and sisters and in the community. And then we actually have more people calling us to say, hey, can we also ride along? So we're starting that mentorship just by, just a few members going down to the community college, getting them involved and talking to them about, becoming a paramedic firefighter, because they just didn't know that they could do it. They just didn't know that the resources were there for them to do it. They didn't know that they would have the backing of fire departments to help them out through the education portion. So once we've got people through the EMT portion, and we are an EMT base, I'm not a medic base yet, which we will be going to. So our next struggle is going to be a medic firefighter. Mm-hmm. So once we got them through that and we had their EMT license, then it's easier for me to do more things for them, to help them along through the process of being hired, such as paying for the fire academy. Right now, we really can't take a chance until we know that you're going to pass that EMT before we can assist you with becoming through the fire academy. And then that way we can also help you out there. But we are, with every part of the program, we are with them. And there is no stop. There is no, I can't do it. There is none of that, because you can't do that here in our service, police and or fire. There is no stop. There is no, I can't do it. And everybody has to know that right off the bat. So what we did was when we got that group into our department, they took a hard look at our department. We had them sit down with each crew. We had them sit down with just the commanding officers, and they showed us what we were doing wrong. We thought we were doing things right. We were actually doing some things wrong. And what we did, we were creating I'm not saying a culture, but we were saying things that were, maybe not the right words to be used, and we were not even knowing we were doing things wrong, And so that was turning some of our mentorship off of these kids. So now that we have that diverse group in with us, we have now developed more of a better way of communicating with everyone. And now we're holding on to these students a little bit longer, so that way we can make sure that they are going through the EMT portion to finish up their schooling and then to get on to the fire academy. Right now, currently, we have 3 women, 1 Asian, 2 African Americans that have been hired through this portion of our process. So since 2018, we've made a lot of progress. And we're striving to keep doing more and more of that because we have to reflect our community. And before 2014, we never did reflect our community. So working with people like Paul Peoples has shown us that getting into schools, getting in with our churches, getting in with these special groups like Men of Honor, Men of Strength, we have to be the mentor to these young men and women, and then letting them have a place to also come in our house at the firehouse to be safe if they need it too, because not everybody has the house that they can go to, and those are some of the kids that it's awesome to see grow up and become EMTs and then now firefighters. Those are kind of the more special ones to you, So, but right now we're pretty pleased that right now when we have a test, we're about 10 minorities to 20. Yeah, so our numbers are increasing, and that was one of our main objectives. That, and then with the studying for the testing, we are now seeing them the higher test scores. So, which means that we can bring them along in the process of the interview and the hiring. One thing that we're seeing with the interview, because we are mentoring them at the firehouse, they're more comfortable to talk. So they may not be able to get the job with us. They may go get a job with, say, Florissant or somebody else, but at least we know that we had a part of that building of that young man or young woman to learn how to talk to somebody and to be confident in your decisions and how you present yourself in an interview. And that's something that we've worked on with everyone, and we are very pleased where we are today. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Ours is more of like a mentorship and more of a, trying to get out more in the community to grab young men and women to make sure that they are educated and into the fire service, and to make sure that they know that they can do it and that we're going to be behind them the whole time.
Chief, thank you. I very much appreciate your input. I chaired the St. Louis County Fire Standards Commission from, let's see, I joined in 11. I think I was chair from 2012 until the end of 2014. One of the issues that I found most frustrating in being able to build some of those diverse pools of talent that you've been looking for is an aspect of the county charter that says you can't get a job in a St. Louis County municipal or fire district unless you go through the county academy. And what I saw were some very senior firefighters who were Black and brown and of color, who after 10 years plus in the city, still had to go through the county academy. And that seemed to be an unnecessary barrier that limited minority participation in all of the munis. Do you have any thoughts about the reality of working on something like that and how it came to be? And because in the whole sort of broad structural racism conversation, that's a glaring example.
It is very much so, because, if you're a city fireman and you got 10, 11 years on, you have a wealth of knowledge. Yeah, that you're not going to learn that in that academy. You've already been through a fire academy. You've already had state 1 and 2. The only thing that's different on the fire academy is that you're getting a fire academy 1 and 2, I believe. But otherwise than that, you're still getting the state 1 and 2 through the state and your hazmat. So, so in reality, it's just one more step that is more of a hurdle that we have to also jump through to have more people work in the county.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How do you, how many officers are you paying, are you sending to the academy yourself as a department?
Well, right now we have sent, let's see, 4, 5, 6. I believe we've sent 6.
Huh, okay.
Um, and and all 6 have passed.
Good.
So we also have like other, men and women that we mentored that are now working in other communities. Just because in the fire service, there's not much turnover.
Right.
When you get a job, you're there 25, 30 years. And even during your promotion period, you're going to have a long wait before you get promoted. But that's where we've also taken a look and made sure that there's an officer program to make sure when anybody is ready, that they are able to pass that test. And we need to make sure that our people of color and any other minority need to be able to take that same test and pass it as well.
And and do you know of other municipalities or fire districts that are doing the same? Do you get a sense that you're kind of on your own in this, or do you see more allies out there?
No, there's more allies. Just Paul People alone, he works for Robertson.
Right.
And his group, he brought in a group out of there that is working with, I believe they're working with WashU now. And that group was made up of firemen from, I believe it was the U City, Robertson, and I believe those were the 2 groups out of there. And they were the ones that came into our department and helped us really do a self-reflection.
Okay. And are you still seeing a high level of from generation to generation? In other words, sons and daughters of fathers who, and I'd say sons and daughters of fathers and mothers, but the truth is, I think it's more sons of fathers.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Yeah. I don't think as much as it was in the past.
Okay.
I do, my son's a fireman, but he also knows what a good job it is and how I come home and I'm fulfilled. So he wanted that as well, and he's also, I've educated him on the way of how to become a fireman. So it is easier for him to go through that process of being, through the interviews and the testing and things like that, because I'm there with him to help.
Exposure,
Yeah, but the one thing is between districts and cities, there's a little difference, and I think it's an easier way to get on a city department that way than it is a district.
Okay. Gotcha. All
right.
right. You have any questions?
Real quick, how much of a hindrance to a young person interested in firefighting is socioeconomics? Like if a person's indigent or just poor, would they be scared that they can't pay for parts of the process?
No, see, that's where a lot of that misconception is and things like that. Because, one thing that's offered in our school is the A+ program. And so when we get into schools, the A+ will pay for your EMT and your paramedic program. All you're paying for is books, and then once you got a paramedic thing, you basically can go to a lot of fire departments and they'll hire you before you have the fire academy in the first place. Some departments will put you through. I know my department would put you through if we had a place open if you were a medic, because we are looking now to go to ALS, so which is advanced life support, and then that's our next challenge: how to keep that minority base keep coming with us through that, because that is another hard year of school that basically your life is given away to school, and that portion of that testing, because it's test after test after test. That's where we need to be there for them, because I think one of the problems is that I don't know if it's from the school, the social where we are with the testing, but we found out testing is not the strong suit and we need to fix that.
Okay. And do you have vacancies now?
Right now, I do not have a vacancy.
All right.
But within the next 3 or 4 years, we'll probably have 4 or 5 more vacancies through retirements.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Chief.
Chief, appreciate you. Thank you.
Problem. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Commissioner Shanette Hall. Commissioner Hall, welcome, and tell us your title and please start your presentation.
Sure. So, good evening to you all. My name is Shanette Hall, and yes, I am on. I'm a member of the. Uh,
HRC, yes.
sorry. um, but however, I would be speaking from my role as a vice president or as the second vice president of the Ethical Society of Police. Specifically, I am on the St. Louis County side. However, we are all one organization. And so just to kind of briefly explain, I won't take up too much of the time, but explain to you what the Ethical Society is. So the Ethical Society is an organization, and specifically who it is that we're talking to, but an association that was founded in 1972 to address race-based discrimination, not only within the police departments, but also how the police departments conducted themselves as it relates to members of the community. And so to back it up a little bit, in the around like 1965, 66 timeframe, the one thing that we all can pretty much say that we do know that was going on was we were right in the midst of the civil rights era. And with that being said, what was beginning to happen is that several areas or chapters of the NAACP was calling for an increase in diversity, specifically with Black people in law enforcement. And that is something that was happening here locally as well. So after those calls came about, St. Louis City Police Department did hire a few Black people who became police officers. And we kind of know why probably that happened, just so the police department can kind of get those civic organizations off their back, if you will. But several people were hired around that time frame. And then what began to happen is they were being subjected to all of the racist practices that were happening within the police department. A lot of officers got together. It was around, I think, about 15 or 16 of them, but a lot of officers got together, which was a lot then for sure. Got together and began to have these conversations, formulate their thoughts around how the police department lacked diversity, how the police department had structures or in place to ensure that more diversity would not come about on the police departments. It talked about the disparities in different units and assignments, so forth and so on. Right in about 1971, 1972, there was this huge incident in St. Louis City where several Black people were beaten by white police officers in St. Louis City. It happened to be such a huge issue that a number of different people called out or came out and called for change. And this definitely included the Black police officers that were in St. Louis City as well. What is also an interesting thing that was happening, because there was this huge, even wider shift that was being put on display, if you will, between African Americans and white police officers, is during 1972 is when they first began. I'm pretty sure it was 1972. The St. Louis Police Officers Association, which is a union in the city, it was formed around that time. Well, right after that was formed, or right around that same time, the Ethical Society of Police was then to form, because we felt as if we had a different perspective and that we were focusing on things that were not going to be addressed by the police department, by the union, and by so many others in the community as well. So they wanted to serve as that voice. They wanted to serve as that protector for the marginalized groups of communities, or marginalized groups of people, within St. Louis City. Since then, we have been unwavering in our efforts. We have not changed, and that's a good and a bad thing. It's good because we'll stay strong in our efforts. It's bad because here we are in 2021 still having to fight the same issues that we fought not only in 1972, but in 1965 as well. And so we have been going on and on for sure, addressing a lot of those same things: the lack of diversity in police departments, the lack of accountability that thrives within police departments, not only exists, but thrives in police departments, the lack of transparency, the police misconduct, the lack of police legitimacy, all these different things we have come out and we've put on the front steps of those in charge that can positively affect change. In 2008, St. Louis County officers, a number of Black St. Louis County officers got together and decided that they needed somebody else to represent them better in their efforts and those things that were most important to them. So what happened was a group of Black officers from St. Louis County reached out to St. Louis City Police Department, specifically the president of the Ethical Society of Police, who is retired Sergeant Heather Taylor, and asked if there was a way that they can begin to expand their association, because it's historically always been in St. Louis City. Those things definitely happen. And we've expanded into St. Louis County. However, it did not come without a fight, and that fight should be very symbolic of why it is the fight is important in the first place. We went in about a year and a half battle that included previous chiefs. That also ultimately ended with our current county executive, Sam Page, of simply trying to be recognized as an association within St. Louis County Police Department. At no point were we ever seeking bargaining rights or anything of that. We left that up to the that exists in St. Louis County, which is the Fraternal Order of Police. We never requested those things at any point. We were simply trying to be recognized and acknowledged, and that fight was extremely hard by our county executive to recognize the an association that represented a lot of Black law enforcement officers within St. Louis County Police Department. Ultimately, we got there, and the fight is, once again, like I stated earlier, still the same as it has been in 1972 and before then. We have still been constantly calling out a lot of the issues that exist, not only within the police department in St. Louis County, but the issues in policing across the country. We've been that voice, if you will, of saying what is needed. A lot of times when we have so many people coming, and not all, but when we have so many people coming and calling for certain acts of police reform, if you will. Many of those things, well, not many, we'll say some of those things are not very reform-like. A lot of times, some of those things that are being called upon simply reinforces the same oppressive structures that we've seen in law enforcement from its very existence. And so what we have made sure that we have done is make sure our voices are heard, make sure we supply people with the knowledge that they need necessary to continue calling for reform, and the reform that's going to be most impactful, especially for the people who suffer at the hands of police misconduct the most, which happen to be Black and brown folks. So I know I kind of talk fast a little bit, but I want to make sure that we have enough time for the people that are coming after me, if there is anybody else after me.
You're fine.
But-
You're fine.
Yeah, can I just follow up something you said before, unless you want to finish and I don't interrupt?
Well, the other thing I was going to add in there is
Okay.
that the Ethical Society of Police has come forth with a number of different things that we thought would change the culture, like I said, of policing, not only in St. Louis County, but St. Louis City, so forth and so on. We are one of the only associations in the country that have written our own studies or comprehensive reviews on police departments. So we had done in St. Louis City. We had submitted several recommendations and letters to former Chief John Belmar, former Chief Mary Barton, which is not really former as of yet, but former Chief Mary Barton, John Belmar. We submitted a number of different things, and we definitely won't go anywhere from there, because what we do know is that we are true servants and servants of all people. And in order for us to be those great servants, that we have to continuously say those things that police departments often try to suppress. But Karen,
I just curious, because and whatever you can share with us that we can put in the record in writing, that would be helpful.
Please.
What are the top 3, if that's fair enough to ask, bullet points that ESOP is really looking to make a priority?
right. And so do you want me to differentiate those between national calls and local calls, or because they kind of overlap, but not necessarily?
Oh, they do. I think I'm more interested in the local piece.
Yeah, I'm
but-
interested in
Yeah,
local.
okay. I'm going to say nationally, we do quite often speak about ending qualified immunity.
Okay.
We can't really talk about that too much in the framework of St. Louis County. We have a hard enough time trying to even be recognized as Black police officers. So here locally, the things that we have called for is, which I kind of touched on in the beginning, sadly speaking, we're calling for the same things that we have been calling for since 1972, since our inception. And so what we began to see is, I'll say the things that are most important. I'll give you these and that are most important, because it's definitely much more than 3.
Okay.
A lot of the things, we submitted a call to action letter, if you will, to Chief Mary Barton back in December of last year. And it was after we have waited an extremely a long amount of time for anything to be done that was going to be most impactful to our police department as far as progressing us forward in an equitable way. And within that letter of what we submitted, a lot of the things that we called for were things that were going to help employees, but also citizens as well who were not in the police department. So we were calling for the chief to hold a series of town halls, that would promote citizens coming forth and putting their complaints on a platform. Because what we do know is very hard to come forth and complain on police officers and police departments because of that intimidation factor and that lack of trust, and what we see of departments not having a higher sense of accountability in the first place. So we called for her. Well, no, let me not say her, for the police department to hold a series of town halls to solicit these grievances from citizens, so we can make sure that we're doing what we need to do for citizens, right? We've asked for them to streamline the acts of reporting intolerance within our police department. One thing that we see often is citizens saying, well, where are the good police officers? Where are they at? And so when we have the good police officers in police departments that are reporting these acts that they see, we want to make sure that it's streamlined as best as possible, and we want to make sure some things are done about that. So a lot of those things they fall within the area of transparency, accountability, so forth and so on. We wanted them to annually publish reports that detail acts of discrimination and prejudice and indifferent practices as well. We sent a list of maybe about 10, 12 things, I think. And none of them have been completed in its entirety. And we sent that letter.
Were they on a specific timeline that you were like,
Yeah,
let's say 1, 3,
Okay.
5 years kind of thing?
Yeah, there was some
Okay.
time that were most support that were
Gotcha.
appropriate. There were a number of different things that probably could have been done in 2 weeks, but we broke it down between 6 months and 12 months. And here we are, maybe 8 months in, and not seeing very much change.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you, one quick question, are you, does your report parallel in any way what the Teneo group reported in their document that they, I guess that was
Provided the county. yeah.
March?
Oh, yeah.
Actually, no, in December. So it's actually
It was December, right, okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
quite funny in a sad way, because we submitted our letter with our recommendations. I think it was about a week or a week and a half before Teneo released their report, and it mirrored each other quite a bit. Actually, if we would have submitted ours afterwards or released ours afterwards, somebody probably would accuse us of plagiarism or something. That's copy each other, and so there's
Okay.
a number of reports that we should be aware about. We've had the report from Ferguson through Forward. We've had the COPS report from the DOJ. We've had reports
Right.
from which is the Center of Police for Equity. We've had the Ethical Society. We've had so many people come forth and say what recommendations should be, and yet here we are still paying for reports.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Okay, and we'll put that in the record. The
Definitely.
report, we'll put that in the
We'll
record.
put it, and anything you want to send to us, we will also put in the form of record as reports or anything that you have already sent. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Officer Commissioner.
Thank you, Officer Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Officer.
I had to correct myself. I was going to say thank you, Commissioner Aaron Steve. Forgive me.
That's all cool.
Well, also as a commissioner, you can feel free to ask questions of
Yeah,
other
that's-
people speaking, which are coming up. So
Yeah, the only thing I actually thought of when what we mentioned earlier was the and I don't want to misspeak too much because I'm not 100% sure, but I got to go back and look. Earlier, and it's actually, I'll laugh a little bit because I was in a class with Matt Crecilius earlier today, and we discussed the difference between intent and impact. And while our intentions may be very good to either diversify police departments or diversify fire departments, whatever, let's just say public safety as a whole, if our intent is not mirroring our impact, then we're doing something wrong. We probably need to start from scratch or somewhere towards scratch, right? And so when we speak about, Karen, I think you and I have spoke about the disparities that exist within the fire departments as well too. And there are some disparities that exist with making sure that funding is there. So it's not as much as a misconception that we think. And when we reference the A+ program, I remember not too long ago reading some data from the state about the A+ program, and that it wasn't minorities that were recipients of the A+ program by far. So we can't even, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist at all, or
Right,
oh
right.
my, but it's not as high as what we think it is. And so if the funding is not getting to minorities, then not as many minorities as would be allowed would be able to pay for such classes. Because being a firefighter is, well, I won't say I would have been a firefighter over a police officer if I had to do it over. I'm not going, but
Well, that's a whole other listening session we don't have time for right now.
if we begin to see those steps that are put into place that are lessening the amount of people who could potentially go to the fire academy, we got to look at the hindrance before then, and not just the ability to who has the dollars in their pockets. It's the people who are even receiving the dollars as well to go to the fire academy.
Right.
Other than that, but
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, Chief.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off the A+ program, because that's something that we saw at one point. I think we only had a handful of students that were even in an A+ program. So that was part of our program as well, is to get out there and educate the young men and women to get into A+ a program, because it is a means of the way to help you get to the fire academy.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Officer Hall, we'll go on to the next.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms.
Right.
Sanders?
Ms. Sanders, are you there? You might be muted, Ms. Sanders. Can you hear us? Look at mute on the bottom of your screen. You have to unmute.
There you go.
There you are. Yeah, please introduce yourself and feel free to start your presentation.
Yes, my name is Gerald Sanders. I am a businesswoman, diversity expert, built one of the largest communications companies here in St. Louis, and my approach has been to use business principles, successful business principles, to target problems that I witnessed in policing. And essentially, I was on the ground and in some of the meetings when after Michael Brown was killed, and it became very clear to me that the approaches would not create a systemic or fundamental change in the kinds of problems we were seeing. So again, I utilized some of the business strategies that I've used for corporations to solve complex problems, embarked upon a one-year study, joined by individuals who I met out on the street. And 1 year later, we produced a sweeping legislative proposal that has been, I should say, vetted by law enforcement officers, including members of President Obama's 21st Century Policing Committee, law enforcement agents across the country, individuals, and it is a first of its kind legislative proposal that essentially invokes the Department of Justice's most potent tool for curtailing abusive policing, which is the pattern or practice investigation. It invokes it every day, 24 hours a day, in every community throughout America. So why don't I just share a little bit about what we've been working on here.
Please.
Okay, I'm going to try to, there we go. It's, okay. First of all, our findings, again, we believe it's important to begin with research to fully understand the problem. And we've, again, been across the country, and we have various stakeholders. And a solution to our policing problem has to be one that addresses the needs of the various stakeholders. We've got the haves, these are the Beyoncés or the wealthy Americans. We see them. Who protects them when they come to a concert? It's the law enforcement. And by the way, the proposal we've developed applies to law enforcement and private duty security officers, as well as every law enforcement institution in the country, including jail, incarcerations, juvenile facilities. This process that I'm going to describe would apply to that. So we have the haves, right? And they are beneficiaries of excellent policing generally. And if you're a have and you're white, you're really getting the best there is. And then you have the have-nots. They tend to suffer the brunt of dysfunctional, unconstitutional policing. And then you have the have a little, but want to have a lot, right? So that is sort of our middle class individuals who often are somewhat disconnected because they don't believe that they are as subject to abusive policing or unconstitutional policing until it happens to them. And I stood next to a lot of people like that, people who never thought in their wildest imagination that they would be the victims or that their children would be the victims, but they've discovered that they are not the haves. And then you have other stakeholders who are law enforcement. You have, of course, good officers, we call them good apples, and then you have the bad apples. But what we don't think about many times are the law enforcement agents who are, when we think about unconstitutional policing, we generally think about use of force. But there are some other concerns that need to be addressed in policing. And then, of course, there are the nefarious actors, right? And I want to point out before I move forward that in law enforcement, again, there are good actors, there are not so good actors. But then there are the nefarious actors who, such as in the DOJ report, that revealed that you had white supremacists who were infiltrating policing for the sole purpose, really, of being able to exact their a price on the people that they don't find desirable. So any solution has to fundamentally deal with these stakeholders. It has to make policing safer for everyone, including law enforcement, including the have a little, want to be a have, the have-nots, and the haves. So when we designed the Uniform Reporting Law Enforcement Improvement Act, again, I say it is a pattern of practice investigation every day, all day, in every community throughout America. Policing can never be acceptable in the United States unless it is consistent from community to community. I shall never forget, I wrote a book and my opening story is on being a little kid in the backseat of a car driving with my parents to Memphis, Tennessee from Detroit, Michigan, being stopped by white cops who did a shakedown on my father, took us to a police station in the dark of the night, and I will never forget the fear of being afraid that my dad would not emerge from that police station. So I thought of that. I felt that when we were writing this legislative proposal. Now, again, any effective policing has to have standardized policing in every community throughout America. So the standards must be the same and they must be enforceable and there must be strong compliance mechanisms. That is a problem that I've talked about with the George Floyd Act across the country, is there are no compliance mechanisms. It is all incentivized. We also have to get rid of the whole collective bargaining influence on policing. This act is based upon the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution, because as we know, there are sundown laws. Anything that interferes with interstate commerce can be covered by the Commerce Clause. And so this act is just like there is a medical act to ensure that there is safe medical practicing across the nation. This act falls within the guise of the Commerce Clause and therefore can legitimately be implemented as a national standard. I talked about the use of force, the standardization. There can't be standardization when you have from state to state different use of force standards. Law enforcement must understand what those standards are. The public must know what they are. And we saw how that played out even in the Michael Brown case here in St. Louis. We had a constitutional standard that was the standard, and yet there was another standard used during the grand jury proceedings. We also need legislation to remedy the known shortcomings in investigative processes. You know, one thing that we were really perplexed by with the Michael Brown case was everyone saw one thing, but the medical examiner's report told another story. So As part of that, to unravel that, we talked with one of the best medical examiners in the state of Michigan, who explained to us that it is the first autopsy that determines the findings. An exit wound can be made to look like an entrance wound. An entrance wound can be made to look like an exit wound. And because law enforcement and the medical examiner and the entire investigative process, because all of those individuals are working together, this proposal takes the investigative process out of the hand of law enforcement and puts it into the hands of a third party. Again, the goal has to be to make policing safer for everyone. Now, let me get to the pattern of practice investigation. And I'll say this, there are incredibly strong training requirements in a way that have never been implemented before. This is a feature-rich program and database that extends throughout the entire criminal justice system. It looks, you can see all of the data that's now missing, how much people are being charged for cartels, the financial impact, the who's going, how people are being routed into this criminal justice system. It's far too rich for me to even cover it this evening. But I will, I do want to focus on what I mean by a pattern of practice investigation every day, all day, in every community throughout America. Every law enforcement agent will have to be certified. And if they are, and this holds true for private duty security, any officer working in any institution, penal institution, et cetera, they must be in this data bank. And in this data bank, they are required to report on all of the encounters that are had with individuals who are subject to their law enforcement effort or activity. That information is put into this data bank. It's race, what occurred, if there's a financial charge, and the members of the public have access to a different part of this database to put their information in. So basically, without my getting into all of this, all of the details, just as we do during a pattern and practice investigation, when all of this data, when individuals throughout the community are interviewed and we're capturing the data from law enforcement files, all of that data is constantly being funneled into a massive database that's segmented by jurisdiction. We will have behind that database a program that is actually searching this database ongoing to look for law enforcement agents whose actual activities and numbers are outside the acceptable guidelines. Those individuals are flagged, and any person flagged, then a lawyer is allowed to, and this is nothing new, this used to be done in the United States all the time. A lawyer can act as a private agent of the United States Department of Justice and bring that matter to light on behalf, acting as a deputy of the Department of Justice. So it's, as I said, it is a comprehensive strategy that also, if there's a law enforcement agent who is determined to be unfit, there's an unfit indicator set, that law enforcement agent can never work again anywhere in the United States, because as soon as that social security number is put into the system, that unfit indicator is set, it cannot be unset. And so that law enforcement agent, again, in any institution. A couple of other things. A lot of the, for example, we found that a lot of law enforcement agents leave their job and they go to a second job. Well, it limits, just like it does for over-the-road drivers or airplane pilots, it limits the number of hours law enforcement agents can work within a 24-hour period. So there are just, it has a strong citizen participation component. It even requires citizen involvement when this law enforcement proposal actually enacted into law and implemented in the form of a legislative proposal, actual legislation. So I will just, again, I encourage everyone to learn more about it. It's at changeisonus.org. We've had countless law enforcement agents who operate at the highest levels tell us that they firmly believe that this is the answer to America's policing problem.
Thank you so much. If you could send us, what you've got that we can enter into the record, or we'll send us the copies of the links, the websites, and we'll follow up to get that information. So we've got it. I appreciate the presentation. Do you see a sense? What's the status of the national legislation? Where is it now?
Well, our first goal was to educate the public. We didn't want to take it to Congress, have Congress neuter it, and then we get something that didn't do the job. We are doing a very good job at that. People across the nation, almost every other night, we're on national shows talking about it. Again, when we stood up in New Jersey, and Perry Tarrant, who was head of law enforcement, Black law enforcement, and he sat on Obama's 21st Century Committee, and he said, we know about it, it's the answer. It's a big, bold idea. People have a problem with a big, bold idea. Right now, and I would call upon the St. Louis County, and so in some ways, I guess I'm echoing something that Ms. Hall talked about. There needs to be hearings. And we right now working on getting a congressional hearing. We need to talk about pedophilia. We need to talk about rape. We need to talk about human trafficking. We have law enforcement agents that we've been advised that are involved in all of this. We see a picture of law enforcement that appears to be only affecting African Americans. But based upon our research, whites are also significantly affected, even though Blacks are disproportionately affected, by painting a picture of policing as white police officers versus the Black community. What we do is we don't tell the entire story. And so those who should be concerned about policing aren't. So
do you have support? I'm sorry, I apologize. Do you have support from Noble or Kalea or IACP in terms of how they're looking at standards, national standards?
We have Blacks in Government, which represent hundreds of thousands of employees across the country. We have members of Noble and Matthew Fogg. We have a number of individual law enforcement agents and some law enforcement organizations that are supportive of this legislative proposal.
Okay. All right, thank you. Did you have any questions?
No, I think that's, I want to know if all the panelists are aware of Raheem.org. Have any of you interacted with that?
Not Raheem.org, but we are changeisonus.org.
Okay.
And again, we are working with CPAC. We're making presentations with CPAC. We're working with community groups across the country and with organizations that are committed, again, to mothers. There are a number of mothers who have been subject to, whose children have been killed by law enforcement. Dr. Robert Motley, who's a professor at Boston University, formerly with Washington University. We have people all over the country that we're working with to advance this legislation, and some of whom have called it the silver bullet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. And we will be in touch. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that.
Thank you for inviting me.
so unshare your screen, and then we'll. Yeah.
And then Matt, thank you for
waiting, Matt.
being patient. Matt Crecelius, St. Louis County, FOP. Hi.
Yes, hi, how are you guys doing tonight?
Yeah,
Good.
please introduce yourself, give your title, and then start your presentation.
Yeah, I'm Matt Crecelius. I'm a police officer with the County Police Department. I'm also the business manager of the County Police Association, which is a part of the Fraternal Order Police. And I also sit on the State Fraternal Order Police Board as well. Mr. Murdoch actually asked me to talk specifically about qualified immunity tonight, which I'd be more than happy to do. One of the good things about qualified immunity is that it is now codified in Missouri statute. So, you know, it used to be and it is in still a lot of places, a court ruling. But there's a whole lot of misinformation out there about what qualified immunity is and what it is not. Two of the biggest points, I want to hopefully be able to show you a YouTube video here real quick that the National Fraternal Order Police kind of put together with some facts. But the two main points is it does not affect accountability. It does not prevent prosecution. It does not prevent discipline. There are a lot of misinformation out there on qualified immunity. So hopefully this will work. Otherwise, maybe I'll just play it and then talk
Should be able
about
to
it
share
while
your
it's
screen
playing.
again, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to share. That works. I go there. All right, it's only 2 minutes, so it's
Sure,
pretty quick.
good.
So hopefully I got enough bandwidth here at home.
Can you turn the volume up some?
It's as high as I can get it. All right, so now I have to figure out how to get back.
Yeah, that was a
before-
little hard to hear, but we will enter it in the record as the video
Okay.
from YouTube. But could you explain to us kind of what we were seeing there a little bit?
Well, I'm trying to get you guys back here.
Stop sharing. And curious whether or not, so as you follow up, my question would also be, now that it's codified stateside, is that something that is going to continue to be part of collective bargaining?
Well, it never has been part of collective bargaining. So,
Okay.
you know, Mr. Murdoch asked me to talk about qualified
Yeah.
immunity, but I would be remiss in my job if I didn't address some points that have come up this evening. But the gist of the video is it is a civil immunity that applies to all government employees, not just police officers. It applies to you guys. You know, as long as you're following the state laws, the county ordinances, your departmental policies, you know, it applies to our public works workers. It applies to everyone who is employed by a government. Teachers, they're employed by political entities, so it applies to them as well. It has nothing to do with criminal. It has nothing to do with internal discipline. It is specifically protects government employees from frivolous lawsuits and protects their basically their pocketbook because they are acting as an agent of the government. The government is responsible for whatever issue came up that day, right? It could be anything. I mean, like a street worker digging a pothole and someone drove into the pothole and you know, someone lost their life because they didn't have a cone marking the pothole. Something as simple as that. As long as that person was doing what they were supposed to be doing, policy-wise and legally wise, they're not liable. If someone wants to sue the government that they work for, that's up to the citizen's choice.
But let me just ask real quick before you move forward. Relative to individual officers and the standard under which they are reviewed, would I be wrong in saying that the officer's reasonable belief that deadly force was going to be committed either against them or someone in the public to which they needed to respond in a protective fashion, is that subjective standard still in place enough, or do you see those laws changing across the country to provide more of an objective standard as the reasonable person?
Well, that's a criminal standard based on Graham versus Connor. That is a use of force standard for an officer and whether or not a person in there, another officer, and a reasonable officer in their situation would act the same way.
Right.
They're two different things. So an officer using deadly force and being not charged or acquitted or anything in a criminal court has nothing to do with qualified immunity. That officer is charged based on the Supreme Court standard set up in Graham versus Connor. So qualified immunity is all civil liability. So if that person's family wants to come back and sue the department because, and you hear it all the time, right? Wrongful death, wrongful death.
Right.
Well, the officer was acting under policy and under the law and everything, then they're not civilly liable for their actions because they are carrying out their duties that they have been entrusted to them. So that is where there's this huge misnomer about what qualified immunity actually is. It is purely civil, and it has nothing to do with the prosecution of an officer after a deadly use of force incident. So that's something that I know the national organization has been working to correct that misnomer in the public. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who just continue to push that narrative. And
How do you think it would be more effective then for your communications generally out in the community for people to understand how does an officer have accountability when there is excessive force or other kind of injury that occurs, in the course of either not getting compliance or something going wrong in an interaction with the public?
Well, there's an excessive force issue. It's handled through the department's internal affairs process, and if it rises to the level of criminal activity, then it's up to the prosecuting attorney to file charges. And again, that has nothing to do with qualified immunity. It's the United States Supreme Court that set up the standard for use of force. And I'm not a representative of the St. Louis County Police Department. I am an officer, but I represent the employees. We have four collective bargaining contracts for civilians, officers, and sergeants, and we represent about 1/3 of county government. We are the labor union for our employees.
Right.
So it's just I don't know if I answered your question or not, but there's we have to keep those two things separate. There's the civil liability and then there's the criminal liability. And it's up to the department and the prosecutors to charge these officers with crimes if that's what they feel happen.
How awkward is it for you? And this is probably an unfair question, but I'll ask it anyway. How awkward is it when you do confront a situation where you've got some officers who look at the behavior of one of their own and say, wow, that really just seriously missed the mark? How does the union put itself in a position to not only represent the interests of its constituency, namely the officers, but also to understand that it has an out-facing responsibility to the community? I don't think there's a magic formula for how it gets solved, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts on how that could change.
Yeah, and it puts us in a real tough spot sometimes on the more publicly controversial incident. What we've done as an organization, your membership in the organization gives you the access to legal counsel. So what we've done is actually join an outside legal defense fund, and it is up to that legal defense fund to determine whether or not someone is going to be receive those benefits, those legal benefits in these situations. And we've done that for obvious reasons. One of them, what you just said, it kind of puts us in a tough spot. As a department, we've started, more training. We've always had the duty to report. It's been in our policies for 20 or 30 years. But recently we've started doing more training on what they call active bystandership and specifically, ways to address these issues when they come up inside of the department.
Do you have influence with the police academy? I mean, do you see the police academy when it comes to issues of equity taking a different role as essentially the first educator for these officers?
Well, the police academy is staffed by probably about 80% county police officers, and then there's officers from other departments there too that are instructors.
Right.
What specifically are you asking as far as their role in equity issues?
Well, I mean, if I think of the union's role, it's not simply, I mean, I guess it is you're acting in the best interest of the membership. Could police unions take a slightly different rhythm in the future and also have an eye towards the community? Because in helping conversations between community and officers who may have been involved in excessive force cases, you actually are serving both kind of at the same time. Do you see that becoming a different kind of reality rather than only being in a I mean, it's a throwaway question in some ways, but if we're talking about changing for the future, do you see the role of the union changing as well?
Yeah, and I think we have quite a bit. Had the opportunity to sit through a couple of the other speakers, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about what collective bargaining agreements are and what they do. In the same with qualified immunity. I mean, I even heard an opinion earlier that has been disproven numerous times by the Department of Justice and Eric Holder in regards to Ferguson. The fact that these statements are continuing to be made and they're just patently false is kind of a little bit mind-boggling to me. But when someone says all the people saw one thing and the autopsy said another, I mean, that has been disproven over and over and over again. And that is just misinformation that people keep putting out there. So, we have to keep addressing it, and it doesn't help anyone move forward when we're still talking about the misinformation from 7 years ago. So, we are on a path to where we're constantly trying to move forward and constantly trying to improve things. And you can apply Chicago and New York and anyone else's CBA to ours. Our CBA, we already have public comments. our CBA doesn't affect discipline. You know, there's all these misnomers out there that the Crime Prevention Commission, who is tasked with their own mission is to reduce violent crime, and their number one goal is to attack CBAs. It just doesn't add up. So for us, we just kind of keep on our path, and our main mission is to protect the employee rights of our officers, make sure they get a fair shake on internal investigations. And the chief of police isn't allowed to come in and just fire somebody. They have an appeals process and stuff like that. He may still fire them, but at least go through the process and do an investigation and make sure what this complaint that someone is bringing forward is legitimate.
Okay, Matt, I got a question for you you said something about active bystander. Are you
Yes, sir.
talking about St. Louis County investing in, what was the New Orleans ABLE program? And is
Yes,
that
sir.
being adopted by St. Louis County? Can you talk to us a little bit about what ABLE does and what that program is?
I haven't been through the training quite yet, but it stands for Active Bystandership in Law Enforcement. It's I believe it was Georgetown University came up with this program. Originally implemented it in New Orleans PD when they were under their consent decree. New Orleans calls it EPIC, I believe.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what their initial stands.
EPIC stands
but
for Ethical Policing is Capable.
There it is. And so the Active Bystandership program is something that our entire department is going under right now. And it's been nationally recognized. It's a great program. And it kind of just builds on what our policies have always been in. It builds on just a duty to report, and as the business manager and the one who was tasked with sitting in internal affairs interviews with officers, whether they're witnesses or complainants or the person receiving a complaint. This is already happening for years. Our officers have been, and there's one recently there where an officer went to their sergeant and basically said, "Hey, I don't feel comfortable the way this call was handled." And the department did investigation and disciplined the officer for it. And then the ABLE program kind of tasked the department with ensuring that there's no type of retaliation or anything there as well. So it's a good program. Sergeant Justin Nichols from our diversity and inclusion unit, and Lieutenant Keith Wildhaber, when he was in that unit, they kind of grabbed this thing, found this. They went through the training in New Orleans, and it's good stuff. So we're excited about that, and I think the department and more importantly the citizens of St. Louis County will be better off for it.
All right, we have one more thing. Our IT department has picked up that video you were trying to share. So I think we can put it in the record now and let our IT department actually play that video for everyone with a better
Great.
sound quality.
Sorry about that.
Okay. No, go ahead. We're going to shut down right after this. All right.
Thankfully, the graphics kind of tell the story.
Yeah.
There's no sound here either.
All right, thank you. We wanted to formally get that in the record. It is now 8:10, and we're a little bit over our time. But I want to thank everyone who showed up tonight and gave us some information. All the information given tonight will be used towards building the St. Louis County Equity Plan. We thank you very much for that. And with that said, we're going to shut down, and everybody have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. We stand adjourned.